From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We start every day with a market check. We will do that again with Abigail Doolittle. Once again, Abigail, little moves up and down. We can talk about those, but let's be frank. It's another day of a tech IPO. Everybody's waiting with bated breath for AIRBNB.
It certainly is, David. Excitement in the air for AIRBNB. This is just extraordinary. After DoorDash absolutely soared yesterday, closing up by about 85%, AIRBNB, when it opens, is indicated to open up more than double. So, of course, the IPO priced at $68. The first indication was at $139. The latest indication I see here is $153. This puts the company's valuation above $100 billion. Now, that is really just unbelievable because just a few years ago, in 2015, this company was worth a little bit more than $10 billion. So in this very difficult pandemic year where their numbers, the fundamentals have actually gone in the wrong way, investors valuing this thing like gangbusters, another blockbuster IPO. It'll be interesting to see how the stock is supported through the day, if it can hold those gains or to what degree it holds those gains. But there's no doubt, David, that the demand for IPOs right now is simply huge. Investors want in. Yesterday, though, we saw a bit of a reversal midday, and a piece of it, the frenzy. Some folks wondering whether or not this is $19.99. So we're watching here. We'll bring it to you right as it does open. As for markets on the day, yes, small moves, although some volatility. The S&P 500 opened down almost 1% earlier today. Now it's actually up slightly. It's an interesting mix, too. It's fluctuated back down, so very, very small moves. But we have the tech-heavy indexes higher once again. Apple helping out. Facebook not. And Facebook, David, so interesting. Yesterday, of course, being sued by the United States and a group of states about monopolistic practices, perhaps motioning that they will be breaking up over Instagram and WhatsApp. The company coming out with an odd defense. In fact, a defensive tone instead of being an offensive tone, saying that just a few years ago, these companies were approved to be acquired. Now they're not. For a company that thrives on change, it seems a bit odd, but it's no longer a shot across the bow. It does seem that this big tech regulation and the breakups that have been under the surface for a few years now, bringing volatility for stocks closer to actually happening, David.
Yeah, in our second hour, Balance of Power on radio, we're actually going to talk with one of the plaintiffs in that case. He's the Connecticut Attorney General. So thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle. While you've been talking for just a couple of minutes, the indicated price for Airbnb has gone up again. It's $154 now, so it keeps going up and up. Well, it's another day without that fiscal stimulus we've all been promised, with both sides expressing hope, but so far unable to find a way to compromise their differences and come to an agreement. Welcome now someone in the thick of things. He is Dan Kildee. He's Democratic Congressman from the state of Michigan and serves in the House leadership as Chief Deputy Whip. So, Congressman, always a delight to have you with us. It's just us talking here, so you can tell me the real deal. Have you got a deal yet, and you're just not telling anybody?
Well, I wish I could say we do, just between us, right?
Right.
No, the reality is we've come a long way toward a deal. And we're talking about the differences in the top line being minuscule. I mean, we're all focusing on about a $900 billion package. That's a positive step because a few weeks ago we were so far apart that we couldn't even have this conversation. Now we're talking about the essential elements. There are some thorny issues regarding employer liability, regarding support for state and local government. But I'm still convinced that by next week we will be able to vote on a package that might not be what all of us want or any of us would write if we wrote it by ourselves, but will provide the economy the support it needs, knowing that we're probably going to have to revisit this sometime in the middle of the winter or early spring.
So, Congressman, you have, I know, some constituents up there in Flint and the surrounding areas who could be really hurt, I assume, if this money goes away January 1, which it will be with some of the supplemental unemployment insurance. What do you say to those people who say, look, just get the deal done. Don't worry so much about the liability. Don't worry so much about the state assistance.
Well, I mean, I understand their point. The problem is that it's like plugging. We have holes all over the boat. If we just plug one of the holes, the boat's still going to go down. The economy really requires us to deal with the issue of state and local government. We can't very well see ourselves providing additional unemployment support, but by not supporting state and local government, see unemployment go up. We really have to address it on every front. But the point you make is right. People just want us to get this done. And that's why we have come some distance, both sides, to arrive at a top-line number that we think we can, hold hands on and jump together. We're working out these details, and it's difficult. To be fair, one of the problems that we've had is that if this is a negotiation between the Democrats and the Republicans have articulated more than one position at the same time. The position that Leader McConnell has articulated versus what Secretary Mnuchin has brought forward, they don't align. So it's really tough to negotiate with a negotiating partner that can't come to a conclusion about what their position might be. That makes it more difficult.
Well, the perception on the outside, and you're on the inside, so you can correct that perception if it's wrong, is that in fact the Secretary Mnuchin might well do a deal. He seems to be closer to Nancy Pelosi, but we've had the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell over on the side saying no way, no how. Is that the main sticking point right now?
That is very close to the truth, and we've been able to negotiate with Secretary Mnuchin. I mean, we did the first two big packages directly with him. He's a person that we can talk to. We don't agree on everything, but he understands how to get to yes. And what Leader McConnell has, unfortunately, is about 20 members of his Republican caucus in the Senate that have said they will not vote for anything, nothing. They support no action whatsoever. So it puts him in a really tough position to try to be responsive to the people that elected him leader when almost half of them are against doing anything at all.
So give us a sense, Congressman, of what it is like up in your district in Michigan. It's a practical matter. First of all, what's the situation with COVID? What's your infection rate? What's the hospitalization? And dare I say, what's the lethality, the death rate going on? And also the employment situation.
Yeah, well, it's all tough. We just had our 10,000th death in Michigan due to COVID. And while the mortality rate of COVID does seem to be coming down, I think largely because healthcare providers have learned a lot from these the first several months, and the treatment has improved pretty dramatically. But, cases continue to go way up. We are at all-time highs in terms of the number of new cases every day, thousands upon thousands of new cases every day. Hospitalizations are up. We haven't hit some of the critical numbers that we're afraid of with hospitalizations, but we know that they tend to lag the case counts. And so when we see these case counts coming up, we know that within a week or two, that's going to hit our hospitals. And so we're bracing for that. And the economic situation is really tough as well. I mean, we already, have had a difficult time in Michigan, especially in some of the places I represent, like Flint, of course, making headway in this economy has been tough enough. This has made it even that much more difficult. We're losing small businesses every day, and that's why what we're trying to get done is so urgent. They need a lifeline. They need it now.
We're all of us around the country are looking forward to a time when we get that vaccine, and the FDA is meeting today, as you know, on the Pfizer vaccine. We'll see what happens with that. But are you confident about the plan for distributing the vaccine when it comes to Michigan? I'm sure you've been involved in this. Do we know how it's going to get distributed? Who's going to get it first?
We are working through those steps, and the state, is obviously going to be in the lead on that. One of the challenges that we have, at least in terms of one of the most promising vaccine, is that the storage capacity is limited. We have only a few facilities that are able to store the vaccine at these very cold temperatures that are required. And that unfortunately works against some of the more rural communities. I'm confident that the priorities will be correct in the sense that healthcare workers, first responders, people who over 65, people with serious health risks will go to the front of the line. But the logistical challenges are serious. This is not simply a matter of, okay, we've got the vaccine, everybody go get it. The logistical management aspects of this are going to be really thorny. And I wish I could say I was more confident. I know that we have to act, but it's going to take everybody pulling in the same direction. And that's why the disunity in the country that is fueled, frankly, from my perspective, largely by the president's position on this. The disunity is very harmful. We need to treat this the way we treated World War II. We all need to hold together, band together, and crush this virus. And that requires us to have much more unity than we've seen in the last many months.
It's really always such a pleasure to have you with us, Congressman. Thank you. It's Congressman Dan Kildee. He's a Democrat of Michigan. Coming up, President-elect Biden has his pick to be the next U.S. trade representative. But what is the way forward that promotes trade and yet protects American workers? We asked Professor Jeffrey Frankel of the Kennedy School. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We turn now to Mark Crumpton for Bloomberg First Word News.
David, thank you. President Trump's election fight continues in a Wisconsin courtroom today. Hearings are being held regarding federal and state lawsuits seeking to invalidate hundreds of thousands of ballots. The president's attorneys are urging the courts to act quickly before members of the Electoral College meet on Monday and cast Wisconsin's 10 votes for Joe Biden. The president-elect won Wisconsin by more than 20,000 votes. Mr. Biden has chosen Susan Rice to lead the White House Domestic Policy Council. Rice served as National Security Advisor to President Obama and was also his ambassador to the United Nations. Rice was also on Biden's short list to become his running mate during the 2020 campaign. The president-elect is also nominating Dennis McDonough, who was Mr. Obama's White House Chief of Staff, to head the Department of Veterans Affairs. In Germany, officials are tightening restrictions and urging residents to stay home over the holidays. Health officials say COVID-19 related deaths are set to rise further in the coming weeks as the disease spreads rapidly among the elderly in Germany. According to new data, the infection rate among people older than 80 is about 2/3 higher than the population as a whole. London has the highest rate of coronavirus cases in England. That's according to the latest data. That's raising concern that the UK capital will be lifted into the highest tier of restrictions when officials review them next week. That would see all pubs, bars, restaurants, and indoor entertainment venues closed. London Mayor Sadiq Khan is urging people to heed social distancing rules. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. President-elect Biden is expected to name Katherine Tai as his U.S. trade representative as he seeks to redirect U.S. trade policy after, I think we can say, a tumultuous 4 years of the Trump administration. Welcome now, Professor Jeffrey Frankel of the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor Frankel served on President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors, where he worked on the economics of international trade. So welcome, Professor. Really great to have you here because you really are an authority on this subject. Give us a sense of a path forward for the Democratic Party, for the Biden administration, that both promotes trade when it benefits the country, grows our economy, but also protects jobs where we need to.
Well, first, good to be with you. Economists like to say that trade raises GDP, which it does, but to admit that there's winners and losers, and to say there's more winners than there are losers, and if the winners compensate the losers, everybody comes out ahead. The problem with that is, in recent years, is that the losers, the people who feel anyway that they're left behind by globalization and technology and other factors, have fallen farther and farther behind. So Joe Biden has said that negotiating new trade agreements is not a priority for him. He wants to put that on hold, and he wants to first take a whole series of measures to make sure that the median American household, the middle class, typical workers are not left behind. Some of those have to do with making the tax system more progressive, but some of them have nothing to do with money directly.
As you refer to economists generally, I mean, the way I learned it back in baby economics was comparative advantage. Basically, it's a competition, and you should let the best person win. The challenge, I think, in international trade is what are you competing on? Because some things you want to compete on, some things you don't. You may want to compete on efficiency. You may not want to compete on the environment, for example. And particularly when it comes to China, you may not want to compete with a country that is going up against you rather than a private firm. How do you discern, if that's the right question to ask, how do you really differentiate between good competition and bad competition internationally?
Well, obviously, the environmental protection in general and climate change in particular is a high priority for the incoming president. And these are the environment, we call them, since we're talking about economist language, we call them externalities, that the market can't solve the problem by itself. That's why you need agreements like the Paris Climate Change Agreement. That's why you need regulation of the environment, mainly at the national level. One of the measures that we can expect to see, I hope, from the new administration is heavy investment in infrastructure with a tilt towards green investments, transportation and energy and broadband and investment, which will put a lot of workers to work, increasing jobs for those who don't necessarily have a college education, while raising the productivity and the growth rate for the future and being good for the environment.
One of the things that President Trump said right from the day he took office was he did not like multilateral approaches to trade. He liked bilateral much better. Does economics teach us anything about the relative strengths or weaknesses of those two approaches?
Well, I think the record that of success, which is none, that he's had with that, shows the problem. I mean, we had a multilateral system where the rules were almost completely written by the United States, and we dominated the negotiations. And President Trump has done his best to tear that apart. The bilateral negotiations, which has consisted mainly of us raising tariffs against friend and foe alike, and then them retaliating, has been a disaster. It's left almost everybody worse off. I said that trade has winners and losers, and has more winners than losers, people on net, and it's a question of compensating the losers. The Trump trade war has had far more losers than winners. Almost everyone has been hurt. I mean, even you think, the auto industry, auto industry is hurt by steel tariffs and retaliation. The farmers who should benefit from trade have been hurt by retaliation abroad. Almost every sector has been hurt. So the bilateral thing has been a disaster. And why would we want to give up a multilateral regime where we get to dominate, we get to be the leader, and to have other countries working with us?
Professor, I wonder if the economic theory of international trade accommodates two very different economic systems, because one of the things that President Trump has complained about, others have as well, is state-owned enterprises and the extent to which the Chinese government is directly involved. They're not just a referee, but they're playing in the game. How can we really adjust to that? How can we deal with it? The WTO doesn't seem to have done the trick.
Well, I mean, not long ago, we had sort of hoped to have to be able to negotiate so-called deep integration, which goes beyond just removing tariffs and quotas, which we had pretty much already accomplished as of 5 or 10 years ago, and to go into deeper integration to negotiate rules about how business would be conducted in different countries. I think that recent history, I've sort of given up on that for the time being. I think it's just too difficult. It's true that China, I mean, it still calls itself a communist country. In many ways, it's very market oriented, but in other ways, the state plays a big role. And under Xi Jinping is reinforcing that. It doesn't necessarily help them. I mean, they've had very heavy investment in excess steel capacity, which is not good for the steel industry anywhere in the world, including not good for them. I don't think this heavy government involvement in the economy is necessarily benefited China.
At the same time, we would take their growth rate right now.
Well, that's right. Even when they have a recession, it's a slowdown to a growth rate that we would take, and they bounce back from the COVID-19 recession before anyone else, and pretty strongly.
So, if the president-elect Biden, when he takes office, says he doesn't want to do a lot of big new deals, what if you were advising him? Put yourself back in the White House. What would you advise him to do in trade? What's the number one thing?
Well, the number one thing would be to negotiate a rollback of the tariffs. We bring down the tariffs that Trump put up, and other countries bring down their tariffs at the same time. That would be number one. If I could really have my political wish list, which is not practical, I would like us to rejoin TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which people, it was very unpopular. Trump pulled us out of it, but even, Hillary Clinton felt obliged to renounce it. So it was very unpopular, but people don't realize what was in there. Besides promoting trade, it had benefits for labor and the environment.
Some of which actually showed up, ironically, in the USMCA, as I understand it. So it was incorporated there.
Right. So people asked how should we reform the NAFTA? I said expand it in terms of countries and in terms of labor and the environment, and some of the things corporations want, and that would be a TPP. And you're right, we got some of it in the
there you go.
New NAFTA. Bit of it, just a little.
Yeah, great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much. That's Jeffrey Frankel, professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. And a programming note, Wall Street Week will air tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Among our guests, we'll be talking with Catherine Baker of the University of Chicago on vaccine distribution challenges. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Yesterday was DoorDash. Today it's AIRBNB. We're going to go to Emma Chandra now for a report on this very hot IPO market. Emma?
It certainly is a very hot IPO market, David. Look at DoorDash. That's it over 2 days. Actually trading in the red just today, down around 5% from yesterday's closing, but still trading at around $176 a share. David, remember it priced at 102, but starting to hear from some analysts today, one of them saying it's overpriced at the moment, saying that whilst it will have some good growth prospects, they just think that because of these frothy beginnings, there's limited upside. And of course, frothy beginnings is what everyone's slightly concerned about with Airbnb. We're waiting for Airbnb to trip for its first trade, currently indicated to trade at above $150 a share. It priced at $68 a share, David, and now at the moment it would get a $100 billion valuation. Just 9 months ago, some private investors got in an Airbnb with an $18 billion valuation, David.
Yeah, they're feeling pretty good about themselves right now. I was on death's door just a few months ago. Thank you so much, Emma Chandra, for that report on, as we say, a very hot IPO market. Up next, we're going to turn to Europe, where we heard from the European Central Bank earlier today, and European leaders are holding their summit today. We talk with Nicholas Dungan of the Atlantic Council. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi both say there's been progress toward a COVID-19 relief bill, but there's still no public sign of a breakthrough on the two main issues that have been holding up an agreement. One is a business liability shield. The other is aid to states. Secretary Mnuchin told Bloomberg today that the two sides had what he called a very productive call yesterday. Attorney General William Barr plans to remain in his post and won't step down early unless President Trump asks him to leave. That's according to a Justice Department official. Speculation has swirled that the Attorney General might resign this month after his latest falling out with the president over the Attorney General's comments that the department had found no evidence of widespread voter fraud in the presidential election. An FDA committee is expected to recommend approval of a coronavirus vaccine after a day-long hearing. Outside advisors are reviewing trial data of a vaccine developed by Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech. Their recommendation will be influential in whether the FDA authorizes broad emergency use of the shot. That could happen this week. The European Central Bank has added another 600 billion dose of stimulus as a wave of rising COVID-19 infections shuts down large sections of the economy ahead of Christmas. The ECB also decided today to extend the support program until at least March of 2022, and the members revised their growth outlook because of the lasting effects of the pandemic. The bank says it believes inflation will stay below the 2% target through 2023. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Well, as we just heard from Mark, the ECB today decided to expand and extend its monetary support for the European economy, saying the pandemic will be more difficult for longer than expected. And European leaders apparently have reached a compromise on that fiscal stimulus package as well. For a report on the state of play in Europe, we welcome now Nicholas Dungan. He's Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and President of the advisory firm Cogito Praxis. So welcome, Nicholas. It's really good to have you with us. So give us your take from you over there. What did they do today, and why did they do it at the ECB?
Well, first of all, we need both monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. And I think, what Christine Lagarde said was that both the health situation and the financial and economic situation remains both uncertain and quite serious. There's no question about it. So the ECB didn't exactly come out and say, whatever it takes, but that's what they're doing. Extending the time horizon to 2023, extending by another 500 billion euros to 1.85 trillion euros. So that's the monetary side. And she quite clearly left the door open for more, although she said it need not all be used up. But that was essentially leaving the door open for more. On the fiscal side, as you say, there's the European Council summit. Hungary and Poland look like they're going to get side letters, which will allow them to go along with the package, which was agreed, let's not forget, in July. That's also a 1.8 trillion package, 750 billion of borrowing for the first time by the European Union, and the rest in other forms of stimulus through the European budget. But the big problem, I think, is we don't know how bad the situation is. And to go back to what your colleague was saying earlier about the US, here, Christmas is canceled. So people won't be traveling, they won't be buying gifts, lots of stores are closed, and we just don't know how bad that's going to look in the first quarter.
Nicholas, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, in the United States, we don't know how bad it's going to look. It's really bad right now with COVID-19. At the same time, there's been a sense with vaccines on the horizon, and that's true both in Europe as well as the United States, that there is a light at the end of this tunnel at some time, maybe in the middle of next year. What should we read into the fact that, as you said, they're now extending this out well past that at the ECB? What does that tell us about how they see this economy bouncing back or not after we've got the vaccine distributed?
Well, I think part of it's psychological. They want to push it out so far that as long as it lasts, nobody can say you stopped short. And there's been a lot of criticism of public policy that's been doing things too much step by step. So essentially, Christine Lagarde outlined a pretty big, pretty long-term envelope. There is among economists, and more among the economists who work for big banks, for example, or analysts, this sense that things might start to get better by the spring. I think we need to be very careful about that. I think we haven't seen the mass layoffs yet. We haven't seen the mass bankruptcies yet. The unemployment numbers don't look that bad, but a lot of this has to do with the furlough scheme, state aid being renewed, because let's not forget, for example, in Germany, 130 billion of stimulus package. In France, 100 billion plus 300 billion in loans. These are unheard of numbers. And this is a transfer of wealth and funding from the private sector to the state. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. And post-COVID, there are other underlying effects, increased inequalities within societies and between societies. I think we need to be very, very cautious about, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel because of the vaccine. That will take a year to vaccinate everybody in Europe, but there may be light at the end of the tunnel, but that doesn't mean that when we come out of the tunnel that everything is just going to be absolutely rosy.
One of the main things that Christine Lagarde and the ECB is focused on is the level of inflation and getting it back up toward that 2% number. As the currency strengthens, the euro, it makes that harder and harder. This is something of what Madame Lagarde said today at her news conference about that question about the currency.
We do not target exchange rate, but clearly exchange rate, and in particular the appreciation of the euro, plays an important role. And exercise downward pressure on prices. So we monitor it. We will continue to monitor it very carefully going forward.
So Nicholas, I may not target it, but it sounds like she's really got a target on it in some sense. How big a concern is this over in Europe, this strengthening euro?
Well, we've had a strong euro in many ways for a long time. I mean, people have been able to argue that it's in a sense always been stronger than it should. This obviously hurts German exports, for example. It doesn't hurt French companies to the same extent because the small ones are not as export oriented and the big ones have subsidiaries around the world. But the reality is that people are saving a lot of the stimulus money. People are not consuming. So there is no upward pressure on prices. There's no wage price inflation, that's for sure. So the stronger euro is going to be a problem for the ECB for some time to come, because if we are in a continued almost deflationary situation and the euro continues to strengthen, then one is on the horns of a dilemma.
Well, talking about horns of a dilemma, let's talk for just a minute about Brexit, because we've talked about it so many times. Now there's another deadline, evidently Sunday. There's so many deadlines. Are they going to get a deal done before December 31st?
I think the short answer is no. And the reason is that nobody has an incentive to do a deal. Boris Johnson, what the British people voted for in the middle of 2016, 4.5 years ago, was so far different from the Brexit that's on offer, even if there were a trade deal by the end of the year. The Brits will grasp the nettle. It'll feel like the Battle of Britain. Of course, there's nobody around who was in the Battle of Britain anymore, but they'll just have to get used to it. Boris has a big majority in Parliament. There's very little political fallout for him for letting the thing go off the edge of a cliff. There's no incentive for the EU to make further concessions. There's been a tremendous loss of trust and influence by the UK, trust particularly with the European countries and particularly with the Commission. And let's not forget, this Brexit saga has served to unite the EU 27 in solidly as never before. So this has actually been a plus for European unity in the strangest possible way. So personally, I can't see why they would even bother to try to. This is not about fish. It's not about a level playing field. It's not about enforcement mechanisms. It's about a different vision of sovereignty. In Europe, people feel that we're stronger together, and at least this radical wing of the Conservative Party, which has taken over British politics, feels that Britain will be stronger alone. I think global Britain will be Britain all alone, doing it alone.
But in the end, it's what it's always been about, hasn't it? It's about sovereignty in the end. Thank you so much, Nicholas. It's always a treat to have you with us. And Nicholas Dungan, he is Atlantic Council Senior Fellow. Coming up, we talk with Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida about prospects for more fiscal stimulus and what we need to get us through the dramatic surge of COVID around the country. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Negotiations on a further stimulus package now will extend through the weekend, it looks like, with various plans being proposed by various players. But thus far, no clear path to a final deal. We welcome now Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida. Senator, thank you for being back with us. Really appreciate it. Give us your perspective on where this stands right now. A, the urgency of it. How important is it? But B, how could we get it done if it is urgent?
Well, I think it's very urgent. I think we have to continue to help the people that lost their jobs. We have to continue to help our small businesses either stay open or get open. We've got to get our schools open. We still need some more money for testing and more money for the vaccine. So I think those are things we ought to do. And I think everybody would like to do those. Unfortunately, there's some people that want to bail out some of these Democrat states. We've already given our states and our locals $500 billion. $500 billion. That's a lot of money, and I've been asking our governors, how have you spent the money, and they don't want to tell us. I've only had about 10 of them told me back in the summer, and I asked earlier this month, and none of them have told us they want money. If you stop and think about it, take New York. Cuomo and I got elected together as governors, and his budget by the time I left office was almost double per person as Florida's. So what a lot of these states are trying to do is use COVID as a reason that we ought to pay for the pension plan of Illinois or California and New Jersey, or pay for the excess budgets of some of these states. And so I don't think that's fair to Florida taxpayer. I don't think it's fair to long-term that we have our federal taxpayers on the hook for state expenses. I do want to continue to help where we can help and where we should help, but we can't be wasting people's money.
So, listen, I think most people agree that some of these pension plans, and they're underfunded or largely unfunded, have been excessive and they've got a real problem. And people are skeptical about why those pensions were promised. At the same time, we do look around and we see people getting laid off at the state level now. We're talking about state employees, which I don't think anybody wants right now, some of the people who can least afford it. Is there some way to separate out those two things so you're not basically shoring up a pension plan that maybe they shouldn't have entered into on the one hand, but on the other hand, really protecting some of the people who need it the most, including in the state?
David, unfortunately, you can't. Once you give the money to the states, they can allocate the money the way they want. They can say they're not going to take these dollars and put it into a pension, but then they take other dollars and they put it into something that you don't believe a Florida taxpayer, as an example, should be paying for. So it's very difficult. The first step that we ought to look at is, these states have not seen in the last few months the big downturn in their numbers. The Wall Street Journal put out that California numbers are actually the last 4 months, I think, are above what they were in 2019. Their budget, they're above projections. They're like $10 billion above projections, 18% above projections. New York's numbers in September were above 2019. So, we ought to, up here, what I'm trying to make sure people do is, okay, let's live in reality. Let's get all the facts together, all right? And then we can make good, informed decisions. But I don't believe that we should have Florida taxpayers pay for the pension plans and excess spending in some of these states. And so I don't think that's fair to people. Think about, David, think of how many people have left New York and said, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of paying these taxes. And now, Cuomo wants us to pay for his big government that he can't balance. He's never balanced his budget. He keeps borrowing more money. And now he's threatened to raise taxes again. How is that fair that Florida should pay for any of this? It doesn't make any sense.
So, Senator, listening to you, it sounds like, as far as you can see right now, things could change, but as far as you can see right now, you don't see any way that you, as a Republican, could agree, and perhaps other Republicans could agree, to really any significant state support at this point as part of a stimulus package.
Well, I would like to get a deal done. I want to help the people who lost their jobs. I want to help our small businesses. I want our schools to get open. So we need to do that. And so what I want to do, though, is understand that take this, $900 billion package. That's $7,000 per household. $7,000 per household. That is not an insignificant amount of money. And we all have to realize when we spend that, if we spend $900 billion, that means that every household's taxes will have to go up by $7,000 because we're not like sitting with a bunch of money up here. The states are actually in a better financial shape than our federal government is. Our federal government has $27 trillion worth of debt. So I'm hoping we can get something done. I think we've got to make sure we do this in a targeted manner so we don't waste your money.
Senator, as I've heard it, you talk about $900 billion. That's what everybody talks about, 916, 940, whatever it is. But a significant portion of that has already been allocated. It's really redeploying funds that were really appropriate as part of the CARES Act. Is that correct? Something like $300 or $400 billion of it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Some of it will be money that we purpose that would come back from the earlier one. But if you stop and think about it, when you have $27 trillion worth of debt, if we have excess money, we ought to be paying down our debt, and then only spend money we need to spend that's very targeted to help the people that really need it. The people that are unemployed, we need to help them. Our small businesses, let's help them. Let's make sure schools are open. That's the things we ought to be doing. But this idea that we're going to take, a taxpayer from a state like Florida and pay for expense in New York, and by the way, look at California and Illinois and New York. Open your economies. What are you thinking? What you're doing to your poor citizens. Open your economy so people can get back to work you've got to do it in a safe manner. But, we can do this in a safe manner. And we got this vaccine coming out. We got more testing every week around our country. We've got to figure out how to do both. Open our economy, do it safely, and then get this vaccine out.
Senator, just give us a minute or so on the other issue that seems to be a real sticking point, which is limiting the liability of people for opening their restaurants back up, other things back up. Is that really a problem right now in this country? Are people not opening back up because of fears about getting sued?
Oh, I hear it all the time. People are talking to me about their concern about, they're going to do everything they can. But think about it. A year ago, we didn't even know what coronavirus was. And so we're sitting here, people are trying to open up their businesses. We're opening up we want our universities to be open, we want our schools to be open. And then we sit here and we say, oh, if you don't do it, if somebody gets sick, they're going to have a lawsuit. I mean, people are going to be too cautious, and we've got to make people feel comfortable to open up our schools, open up our businesses, to get this economy going again. We got to get back to normal as quickly as we can.
Okay, Senator, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. That's Senator Rick Scott, Republican of the state of Florida. Coming up, the latest on Airbnb. As we wait for the company to start trading, all signs point to a blockbuster trading debut for the online home rental company. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. It's already been a big week for IPOs, and Airbnb just could be the biggest of them once it officially starts trading any moment now. We keep waiting for that. Abigail Doolittle is here for a full report. So, Abigail, where are we?
Well, we're still waiting for shares to open. It's really incredible, David, after DoorDash yesterday absolutely soaring, up to 86%, 85% on the close. Right now, we're waiting for Airbnb to open. It's priced at $68. That was well above two different ranges. So the demand for these IPOs, these initial public offerings, is just huge for these technology companies. The last indication that I've seen here, $150 per share. That is more than double. Can you imagine that, David, that you could just double your money in a day? That sort of frenzy, though, that demand is really leading some to be concerned about the idea that, is this a repeat of 1999? Is there a bubble here? Plus, DoorDash, of course, has benefited from the pandemic in terms of people ordering food in. Airbnb is the opposite. They, of course, have their lodging business, and the numbers are down in a big way this year. So some folks questioning whether or not the valuation should be that big. Right now, set to be more than $100 billion, David. Incredible.
Pretty stunning, more than $100 billion. You could argue the other side of that, though, right? Which is DoorDash is sort of at the peak of the market because everybody's shut up at home. And in fact, there may be more room to grow for Airbnb if we get that vaccine, we get to something like a normal life.
I think you're right about that, David. I think that the investors, traders really for Airbnb are looking further out, the idea that this is a long live business, and the fact that this year the numbers are down so much, it sets up for easier comps for next year and going forward. Whereas to your point on DoorDash, it might be more of a near-term phenomenon, plus how much bigger can that market get? So Airbnb, there is longer-term potential. Plus, investors just love CEO Brian Chesky, who of course was on Bloomberg Television earlier with our Emily Chang, and he was just dumbfounded by the fact that the price at that point was indicated to open at $139. So it was really a touching moment on TV, David.
Yeah, celebrating with his parents and his dog, right? A golden retriever, as I recall, as a practical matter. Let's expand this out just a little bit, because in your note today, you referred to tech overall. I see the NASDAQ actually is up a little bit, just a little bit. The others are down. But how much has the Facebook suit that we saw yesterday, how much does that really hit tech?
You know, so yesterday there was definitely a bit of a hit to tech. Earlier today, the same thing. The NASDAQ had on the open been down about 1%. And this Facebook is very, very interesting in the fact that you, of course, have the FTC plus a group of states suing the company on monopoly-type charges, saying that they may have to break up and separate out the Instagram and the WhatsApp. The company coming back with a preliminary response, sort of defensive in tone. You might want to see them be a bit more offensive, but saying a couple years ago you said those were okay. Why aren't those okay now? So it just is a little bit odd, David, because of course this is a company that thrives on change. So here's this change. The biggest point that we were making earlier when we spoke, David, is the fact that this is not new. This has been happening since 2018. Back then, it seemed more like a shot across the bow. It created volatility for the markets. Now it seems like we may be getting closer to some sort of breakup or regulation being a bigger risk here for these big tech
Well,
companies.
the breakup
David.
is key. Unlike the Google suit, they're asking really to break them up to get rid of both Instagram and Snapchat. Thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle, for that report. We keep waiting for that Airbnb IPO for the start trading here. And coming up in the Balance of Power is going to continue on Bloomberg Radio in our second hour. We're going to have more on tech. We're going to talk to one of the plaintiffs in that antitrust suit that Abigail was talking about, that one against Facebook. He is Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.